Good morning. It is Monday, the December the 4th, 2023. I'm Senator Dick Black, and today we're going to talk about, particularly about a Washington Post article, and the topic of our discussion today is the United States has lost the war in Ukraine. Let me give you a little bit of background. I was not simply a politician. I was a Marine Corps helicopter pilot, and I served in Vietnam, flew 269 combat missions. Aircraft was hit by enemy ground fire 4 times. In one instance, we crash landed after machine gun fire cut our rudder cable. I volunteered to fight on the ground with the 1st Marine Division. About midway through my tour in Vietnam, there were heavy battles underway around the major city of Da Nang, and I fought in about 70 different combat patrols. Some of them were very light fighting, but some of them were very, very bitter fighting with many casualties. So what would happen, we had a forward air control team that had a couple of radio men who would be with me, and there would be a man with the 3.5 rocket launcher. It was very much like the old World War II bazooka. And it was used for marking targets with white phosphorus shells. I've been wounded. My radio men were killed right beside me. I've administered first aid on the battlefield to a man who was dying of a white phosphorus artillery shot and burned him horribly, hideously. He died that night. While I was wounded, I was administering first aid to our forward air controller who had shrapnel that had penetrated his neck, and his heart was pumping his blood out in little spurts through a hole in his neck. My first aid is I plugged his neck with my thumb, and so I understand combat. I was a helicopter flight instructor, and then I ended up being a Marine Corps company commander. And I had the company that was activated to prepare to be flown in and to advance into the demonstrations that were taking place at Yale University with the very, very violent anti-war demonstration. We never deployed, thankfully. But in any event, I know a great deal. I've been studying military and foreign affairs since I was 8 years old. That's a long time ago, I can tell you that. I constantly, incessantly digest information, particularly about the Ukraine war at this particular time. So with that in mind, I want to discuss one particular article that's the focus of what I'm talking about today. I changed our topic for today because of this article. Now, the Washington Post has not done the finest job of reporting on the Ukraine war. There's a great deal of propaganda that that emanates from the Post, and I don't say that in a political way, but it's often said that the Washington Post is the mouthpiece of the Central Intelligence Agency, and I think there's a great deal of truth to that. So there is, when the establishment decides that they're going to hype up some particular thing, whether it's the demonstrations at the Capitol on January 6th, whether it is COVID, how the whole world's coming apart with COVID, whether it's global warming, or most importantly, when we invade a particular country or we promote a certain war, the Central Intelligence Agency works with the Post, and I believe, the Washington Post is in touch with all elements of government. I'm not saying that they speak only for one, but they do tend to represent the establishment, and that's sort of where some of the informal monikers about Washington Post come from. With that said, though, I came across this article this morning, and I found it to be extremely well done. I would recommend that anybody interested in this topic read the Washington Post article. This is today's article, and it is entitled "Stalemate: Ukraine's Failed Counteroffensive." And the byline says, "Miscalculations, divisions marked offensive planning by U.S. Ukraine." One of the things that is most stunning about it, we have been reporting from the beginning of the war, the very extensive involvement of the United States, the actions that it took planning forward for the war. And it began, the war is essentially Obama's folly. The White House under President Obama started things in motion that where the Central Intelligence Agency worked with MI6, and they overthrew the legitimate elected government of Ukraine and installed their own man. Later, they became dissatisfied with him. They came up with Zelensky and assisted in putting him in office. The vision of the Obama White House was that they would overthrow the government of Ukraine, they would arm a vast army of Ukrainians, and they would employ those Ukrainians in such a way as to destabilize Russia. Now, the article here, just to sort of bring it up to date, that occurs in 2014. The U.S. sends vast amounts of funding and arms. We literally had American soldiers and Canadian soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, training Ukrainian forces, sending them into battle against the Donbass. And the Donbass is a portion of Ukraine right on the edge of the Russian border. The people there are ethnic, cultural, and linguistic Russians. They speak Russian. The history that they learn is Russian. For all practical purposes, they're Russians who just happen to be on the Ukrainian side of the border. So we have helped Ukraine to wage war against the people of the Donbass since 2014. And now to bring it up to date with the Washington Post article, where they talk about the miscalculations and the divisions that marked the offensive. This goes back to June the 15th. Now, this is very shortly after the great Ukrainian, the much touted, hyped counteroffensive of Ukraine had been launched. And the Post has very good information about some of the things that were transpiring. And there was a meeting held at the NATO headquarters in Brussels, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was accompanied by an array of American generals, and they sat around the table and they discussed what was going on with the leadership of Ukraine, not with Zelensky, but with others. And the words of the Post were that the room was heavy with an air of frustration. And Lloyd Austin made the assertion that Russia's troops aren't invincible. Obviously, things were unraveling on the battlefield, and at the time, Ukraine was suffering disastrous consequences as their armored vehicles were being destroyed in large numbers by Russian helicopters, by the most effective drone warfare ever known, and by artillery that was just massive. And it thwarted every attempt that they made to advance. And the Ukrainian officials said, we cannot maneuver because of the landmine density and the tank ambushes. The great German general Heinz Guderian, he was the great armor general of Germany during World War II. And around the time of the German failure to completely overtake Moscow, Guderian made the comment. He said that the Germans are generally very stubborn in the defense, and this is just being proven once again. The Post talks about the counteroffensive being born of optimism, and then the reality setting in that they had failed to deliver the expected results. And this has generated much friction and second guessing. Everybody, of course, wants to point the fingers at the other guy and say he's the reason that we are about to lose the largest war ever fought in Europe since World War II ended. They go on to talk about how the Ukrainian, U.S., and British military officers held 8 major tabletop war games. Now, this means that the United States literally was planning every aspect, whether it was supplies, whether it was medical attention, whether it was the influx of armor, and the actual maneuver of forces on the ground in this battle. Now, keep in mind, there is not a single general in the Pentagon today that has anything approaching the experience that I had in Vietnam, and many of the guys that I sent back in body bags. I've dragged any number of bodies off the battlefield. The guys who are in the Pentagon today have always fought against small, weak, surrounded third world countries. In Iraq, there were guys with sandals and a rifle sent out to stop an M1 tank that could fire shells and blow them to pieces a mile away, where they couldn't even reach with their guns. So none of these guys has any understanding really of warfare. Now, the Washington Post has a number of bullet points, very, very well done. And it says that many in the Ukraine and the West underestimated Russia's ability to rebound from the battlefield disasters and with their perennial strengths. Now, the West, and I would include the Washington Post in this, when they talk about Russia's battlefield disasters, I won't go into it in detail, but Russia rushed into this war in order to prevent the Ukrainian huge attack on the Donbass. And the decision was made. Russia had tried and struggled desperately to avoid getting involved in this war. And at the last minute, Putin said, we just can't do it anymore. If we don't attack. They're going to attack. Let's get on with it. They had enormous success for a very short time, but they were attacking with a very small force. It just was utterly inadequate, and yet because they had the element of surprise, they were able to expand, and they overextended themselves dramatically. The first great victory of the Ukrainians was in a massive drive south from the second largest city, which is Kharkiv. And they cleared out the Russian forces in a very large area. What the West has never confronted is that the only thing defending that area was a force of about 2,000 Russians. I mean, they were faced by these phenomenal odds. There's no way that any force, I don't care how good they are, could have withstood that. We don't recognize that. So it's sort of locked into Western mentality that Ukraine had this great victory. It was important, but it was not a dramatic military event. I have a question that just came in from Chris Stolitz, and it says, what will happen with all the aid from the U.S. To Ukraine after the conflict? Will this aid be repaid, or will it be a reason for the U.S. to cooperate and grab the Ukraine assets? There are certainly, I would just answer this, there are certainly elements. BlackRock is known to have been over there. I believe Soros has been involved. There are elements of the globalist movement that have worked to buy up assets of the Ukrainian people that owned by the nation of Ukraine. They're able to get them for pennies on the dollar because Ukraine has no money. But here's the thing. We've provided this incredible amount of aid. When the war effort collapses and Ukraine is forced to make peace, I think it's highly unlikely that we are going to continue promoting Ukraine as essentially a welfare state. We pay their entire budget we pay for all of their governmental employees, like their entire civil service. We pay their pensions, everything. And we pay much of the military budget. Europe pays almost all of the remainder of it. So essentially, Ukraine is a and they just simply operate like the old Hessians. You know, they are a mercenary force under the United States. When the war is lost, we're out of there. So these people are going to be phenomenally impoverished. The only way that they are going to be able to survive, in my opinion, is to do everything that they can to restore relations with Russia, which, because of the geography and many things, will be in a far better position to help them economically. And I don't mean like foreign aid, but I'm talking about trade and real substantive things. So I think, unfortunately, very sad. Ukraine has become a nation of widows and orphans, and so I think it's going to be very sad what happens to them. There's going to be terrible poverty there. But anyway, let me just continue. The Post says that the year began with Western resolve at its peak. Ukrainian forces highly confident, Zelensky predicting decisive victory. And this I quote, "But now there is uncertainty on all fronts. Morale in Ukraine is waning. International attention has been diverted to the Middle East. Even among Ukraine's supporters, there is growing political reluctance reluctance to contribute to a precarious cause. The supporters of Ukraine are beginning to recognize, I'm talking at a high level, they're beginning to realize the war is lost, and they're reaching a point where they're not going to want to throw good money after bad. And so they go on, they say, together, all these factors make victory for Ukraine far less likely than years of war and destruction. Now, I disagree with that. I think it was sincere when they wrote it, but there's this feeling that somehow, if the war in Ukraine is a disaster, that Ukraine would just continue fighting as long as we tell them, and they'll do our bidding. I can already see signs of fraying on the battlefield. I don't want to overstate that. I think some people have perhaps, advanced that a little bit more, but on a whole range of fronts, Russia is eking out small gains. General Zaluzny, the top general for Ukraine, is talking with General Gerasimov of Russia, and the two of them have been conducting quiet discussions of how this war can end. They center around Russia's basically keeping what it has. And those are very preliminary, but they're very real. The war is going to end. It's going to end with a Ukrainian defeat, with a Russian victory. And the United States will be faced with a situation where we, through the actions of people who are so intellectually inept, so politically indoctrinated that they can't seem to see anything from the eyes of anyone else. And the United States we're the only ones who have motivated this war. Even the Ukrainians, they weren't the big motivating factors. They wanted peace almost from the beginning of Russia's involvement. But we have this idea that, well, we're going to keep sending some money, and that means the war will go on. There is going to be a point, and I don't think it's going to be terribly long, where the Ukrainian troops begin to comprehend that the war is lost. And so if you're going to get your arms and legs blown off, if you're going to lose your eyesight, if you're going to have your groin shot out, or if you're going to just body bag, what are you making that sacrifice for? You're making it simply so that U.S. officials are not embarrassed, so that the globalists can somehow pull their money out in time to save something. You'll be dying so that officials in Kiev are able to get the last dollar over to the Swiss bank accounts before the collapse comes and flee the country. That's not worth dying for. These are very brave, very courageous soldiers. They fought with great gallantry, but the war is lost. And here you had General Mark Milley. I think anyone listening knows my impression of the plump, flaccid, histrionic chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former chairman, and he goes to inspire the Ukrainian troops. He literally went in there to give the rah-rah talk to them, and he says, there should be no Russian who goes to sleep without wondering if they're going to get their throat slit in the middle of the night. What has Mark Milley ever done in battle? I mean, seriously, this guy is the biggest clown and buffoon. This is the fellow who studies critical race theory, what a group of black Marxists write in some textbook, so that he can understand why white people are angry and won't re-enlist in the army. It is phenomenal, the lack of fundamental intellect and moral integrity that infest the Pentagon today. It is very sad, because it would be a joke if it were a movie or something, but there are very good men who perish in battle just to protect the political and professional futures of buffoons, absolute imbeciles who infest the top ranks of the military today. And it's sad that you can see right behind me, I've got the Marine Corps flag. I'm very proud of it. But the Marine Corps just lost or just retired a commandant who just made the most inept decisions in the history of the United States Marine Corps, did enormous damage to the fighting capabilities of the Marines. Just ineptitude, people who lack the intellectual skill to comprehend the gravity of the decisions that they make. When this is all over, it's going to display right out in the open the ineptitude, the moral and intellectual corruption of the elites at the global level and at the national level, within the Department of Defense, within the White House. This war has been a tremendous bloodletting, and probably the only thing the United States did when it embarked on this war was to make sure that other people died, so that you didn't have American families calling for some of these people to be hanged for what they have done over there. In any event, I believe that we are at the point where we're beginning to see the war unravel in a very serious way. And so with that, I will sign off for today. Thank you very much for joining me. And we should be back here next Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's U.S. time, Washington, D.C. time for those overseas. And we will continue our focus on the news. This has been Senator Dick Black, retired Colonel Dick Black. And I just had a very nice note from Charles Messina. Says, Colonel, I'm here with you, sir. I am a Vietnam vet. I got to tell you, Charles, we made a lot of sacrifices, and the things we did, you know, to look back and to look at the selfishness and the moral decadence and the perversion of these guys who fill the Pentagon today. And I think back to the people who fought in Vietnam. And on my final patrol, we fought our way across the Hoi An River. My chief radio man, Corporal Henry Smith, had been with me for months in the most bloody battles. And he was supposed to catch a plane home that morning, and he volunteered to join Fox Company, 1st Marine Regiment. We fought our way to the Hoi An River. We fought our way across under fire on rubber boats. We charged up the other side, and I stepped in a punji pit. I yelled out to everybody. I said, get your interval, watch your step. I said, we're in the middle of landmines. I just stepped on a punji pit. My foot didn't go. I felt it sagging. I pulled my foot back, so I was unharmed. And we walked about 3 paces further. The earth exploded. I thought I had stepped on a mine, dirt flying up right from under me. And I was hurt. And but I realized very soon that it wasn't me, that it was Henry who had volunteered. So I think back the sacrifice. I mean, I've dragged dozens of Marines off the battlefield, including one man who won the Medal of Honor posthumously, and then I listened to people like Mark Milley, who sits there and he angrily sneers at the Senate committee and explains why he's studying critical race theory and how it is to understand the flaws of the troops that he commands. And I'm infuriated and I'm disgusted by the basic lack of moral integrity and decency by these people. So I have others who are signing on with a hi from Italy, and anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to have to run at this point, but anyway, please join us again for Focus on the News. This has been Senator Dick Black, Colonel Black, and best wishes to you. We will see you next week.